In this section, let's start talking more about Ansible modules. So let's start out by constructing a simple Ansible playbook. We'll call it my_modules.yaml. Do my YAML 3 dashes. I'll give it a name. I'll just say simple playbook at the top. I'll specify which host that I'm going to execute it on. At first, I'll just operate on the local group, so just only localhost, and then I will specify the module I'm going to use. Remember here, I'm saying we're going to use the ping module, and in this case, there's no arguments associated with it. So then I can execute that playbook. I can do Ansible playbook, my_modules. I'm going to specify explicitly the Ansible host file I'm going to use using the -i for inventory, and I'm going to say use the Ansible host file in my current directory, and then let's give it the -v argument so we get a little bit more output. And here I see that the ping worked successfully. Now, I also added into my inventory file, I added this servers group with PyLab10b, which is another server that I can SSH into, and a couple of variables associated with that. Now, if I go and SSH in to that server, you see that I've set up the SSH truss so that I can directly SSH machine to machine without any password. And you can see that I'm now logged in to a new box. Now if I come back here and I look at my Ansible host, you'll see I've specified that the Ansible_connection equals smart. So we're not going to use Ansible connection equal local. In this case, I'm actually going to use SSH to transport the module to the remote box. And I'm actually saying which Python to use on the remote machine. So this is the Python that's going to be used to execute our module when we ship it across the network. Now if we go and update our playbook, we can say the host is no longer local, it's going to be servers. We go and re-execute our playbook and see if this executes properly. It did. So under the hood here, Ansible shipped out this module to the remote machine. It used SSH to accomplish that. Then it used Python on the remote box to execute the ping module, and then it shipped the JSON response back to us. So we know that entire communication chain is working correctly. If we execute or if we SSH back into the remote server, we cd into the .ansible directory. This gets created automatically by Ansible. You'll notice inside here there's a temp folder. You notice the timestamp there matches close enough that matches our current timestamp. It created this directory at some point in time. It uses this .ansible/temp to store the modules that it ships across the network, and then it executes them using Python. And it automatically, in general, it automatically removes them after it's executed them. Now, if we go back into our playbook, we can start adding different Ansible modules that we'll call. So for example, I showed you in the last class, I showed you the debug module, and the debug module lets you print out some message. So here we'll say hello world. A lot of times the message that we'll use is some variable we're trying to look at. But here we're going to use this just message, and we're going to pass in a string, and the string's just going to say hello world. And we'll go ahead and execute that. Okay, so we look at the various tasks that we have. So here's our play. Here's the string that we put at the top, simple playbook. Then it automatically does the fact gathering. Notice it's doing the fact gathering on PyLab 10. It does the ping module. Then it gets down to the debug module, prints out the string hello world. Now we can start doing other things as well. So let me copy this example of doing a pip module. So let me copy this, And let's put this in our playbook. Okay, so here I have a name string once again. So it's going to show with this task, and it's going to show the install NetMiko. Then it's going to say use the pip module, and then here's arguments associated with the pip module. So pip is the Python package manager. We're going to install the NetMiko library. We're going to install it into this virtual environment. You could also use pip to actually create the virtual environment if it didn't exist. And then here's the version that we're going to install. Now, in general, Ansible is going to try to use, in general, Ansible modules are created in an idempotent way. So what that means is it's going to first try to check, is this thing already been done? If so, it's not going to take any actions. If the thing hasn't been done, if the intended end state is not in the desired end state, then it'll make changes. So if we think about that in terms of this operation, what is the Ansible pip module going to do? It's going to first check if NetMiko is already installed in this virtual environment. It's going to see if it already has version 128. If it does, then it's not going to do anything. It's not going to make any changes. If it isn't already installed, or if it isn't already version 128, then it's going to make the changes to get the system into that desired end state. Now remember, this is operating on this remote machine, so it's going to make these changes on that server 10. Okay, so let's go ahead and execute this playbook and see what happens. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and turn off r-v to make it look a little bit simpler. Okay, so here it does the ping, here it does the debugging, here it installs NetMiko, but notice it's already in the OK state. The remote box already has NetMiko version 128. Let's go ahead and, for grins, let's make this be a different NetMiko version. So let's change it to NetMiko 110 and rerun our playbook. Now we get here and you see a change happened. So it went ahead and made the change. It converted it to NetMiko 110. Now if I SSH back into that remote box, I look at what's installed for NetMiko, I now see that I have NetMiko 110 installed. If I change this back to 128, re-execute my playbook, it's going to convert it back to NetMiko 128. We can now see it has NetMiko 128. Now there's lots and lots of modules that you can use. So if we look at some other modules that we can use, now I'm not going to actually execute this because for various reasons some of these won't work. Like for example, one reason being they might require sudo privileges. They might require, in the case of the yum, they require that you actually use the system Python. But let's look at some various modules that we could execute. Generally, this is going to be in the context of servers, and here a little bit I'll start adding on and expanding and talking about modules that you could use with networking devices. So here's our ping module. Here's the yum package manager module. There's also a module associated for Debian Ubuntu systems that you can use with apt, but this one's for yum. Here's the arguments for that. This would install GCC, make sure that it was present. Here's the pip module and its arguments. Here's a module for copying a file. So if we wanted to install a vimrc, in this context it would look in the current working directory for that file. It would install it on the remote machine at this location with this user, this password, these permissions. In this example here, I'm actually adding a cron entry. So this would add an entry into the cron. Now this one would need to be run as sudo permissions because it's installing it into the root cron. but it's showing you using the cron module. Here is actually creating a directory on the remote system. It would create this home get user admin. Once again, it would have to have the permissions to do this. Here's the owner, here's the group, this is a directory, here's the permissions on the directory. Here it's just running actually a system command that it runs on the remote machine. And then here it's using the template module. And the template module is a way you can specify a Jinja 2 templating. You can then process it with certain variables, and then it'll install it on the remote machine. And we'll talk more about templating later in the class. So the main thing I'm pointing out to you here is there's a whole bunch of modules available to you. These will all be called inside the tasks section, and then you refer to the module explicitly and you pass it in a bunch of arguments. Now, how do you find which modules are available to you? You go and search on the Ansible documentation. There's lots and lots of modules. If we look at the networking modules, you can start to see various options available to us. Let's search down for Arista, EOS command, EOS config, EOS fax, bunch of F5 module, here's Cisco IOS, here's IOS XR, here's Junos, here's NXOS. So there's lots of modules available to us both in the system world, also in the networking world. Main place you look is going to be on this Ansible module documentation. Now, one other thing I want to point out to you about modules is if they're not modules that are built into Ansible, which quite a few of the modules are used for networking aren't directly built into Ansible, you need to tell Ansible how to find the modules. Now, one way you can do this is with the -M and then the path to the module. So if you're running your playbook and you were trying to use a module that Ansible didn't know how to find, you would use this -M. This is modifying the module path, and then you would specify the path to the module that you want to use. Another way you can do this is you can update your .ansible config file. And remember, this is a file that has special variables that change the behavior of Ansible. We use this to overwrite the host file to point to Ansible hosts, but you can also specify where to look for libraries. So here we're going to look in the Ansible library directory. We're also going to look in the Napalm Ansible library directory and in the Juniper library directory. So you can change the module path of where it's going to look for modules.